So I'm here with Stella Perrett, political cartoonist and illustrator. Stella, thank you for speaking with me today.
Oh, lovely to speak to you again, Isabella.
So this is actually our second time speaking. We had recorded an episode a couple months ago, and we'll get into maybe why I asked you to re-record, because there was something that you mentioned about your upbringing and your experience being a woman with dysphoria that was so potent that I thought about for months. And I was, about to edit our episode, and I thought, no, we absolutely have to re-record because, I've spoken to a lot of women who have been canceled, fired, been forcefully, had to resign from their positions for talking about the harms of trans ideology. But what I'm more interested in now is actually exploring why this issue is so powerful for women. Why is it that some women are on the front lines of it? Like, what is this activating in each of us that feels so important that it's not a choice? It's just obligatory at this point. So before we get into that, for those who don't know what happened to you and your story, would you talk a little bit about what happened at your job and your resignation?
So I was the regular political cartoonist for a national daily newspaper, which sounds much more grand than it actually is. It's a very small circulation paper, a very hard left newspaper called the Morning Star. So it's literally the mouthpiece of the British Communist Party. They have other cartoonists, but I was the one that was in there every week, week after week. They thought very highly of me, I got on terrifically well with them. If you're part of an organization like that, it's quite a family feel to it. They were very supportive of things that were in my personal life, and I am still friendly with a couple of the journalists there. I don't hold anything against the newspaper at all. So it wasn't a paid job. When you work for a paper like that, you're basically doing it to support the cause. But I did have a public platform. That was a national public platform. So I was known as their cartoonist. That gave me a lot of street credibility, I have to say. I had 5 years with them, and they were very happy years. And in all that time, I did not do any cartoons on this issue. And the reason for that was not that I personally wasn't interested in it, but I was covering the kind of issues that the newspaper wanted me to cover. So they were very based on unions, and so it was very, very left-wing stuff, things about austerity and the gig economy and, anti-monarchy, anti the police. Those were the sort of subjects. So the reason I did my cartoon, and you might, I don't know whether you might put a link to it later on under the video, or a link to an article that it's in so people can see it, is that it was in the news that particular week, which was the end of February 2020. And that's how I work as a political cartoonist. I have a look at the top stories, and I think, well, what would interest the readers of this outlet? And it was about women's safe spaces, and there were meetings going on, which you may have heard of, which were disrupted by trans activists, and women on the left were getting very upset about it. So it was a story. It was an actual big story in the news. And I did a cartoon about it, emailed it off to them with a little explanation about the fact that I thought I felt very close to this because I'd had gender dysphoria myself as a teenager. And so, the subject was quite close to my heart, really. Because by that time, I'd been starting to read a bit more about it. You don't do this in a vacuum. And I thought, fine, yeah, sent it off to them. And a couple of days later, somebody came up to me at work, one of my union colleagues, and told me that a cartoon of mine had created a huge stink, at the newspaper. And I didn't know, because I didn't know whether it had been published or not. And I had to go on Google myself and find out that my name was being trashed all around the world as a transphobic cartoonist. that they'd been forced to apologize for publishing it, that they'd had to print a retraction. And then a week later, another retraction because it wasn't good enough, because, you know, the mob was piling in on them. It wasn't just trans activists. If that was all it was, it might not have mattered to them so much. But it was the fact that the Trade Union Council, which is over all the trade unions in Britain, had a special meeting about it and threatened them with defunding if they did not cancel me and apologise for the cartoon, never use me again. And worse than that, in future, they have, from that point on, they've always had to print something from trans activists as balance when they print anything from about women's rights. And they are still under that edict, which means they still can't print my right of reply, although it has been published somewhere else. It's been published on women's various women's sites and on Common Ground Media. So they didn't contact. I was dropped without a word. This is similar to what happened to Megan Murphy. Actually, she was dropped without a word from an organisation she'd had a very happy relationship with, and I only found out months later the actual ructions that it had caused. You know, the editor had threatened to resign, half the staff had threatened to go, and all this. The chaos it had caused, you know, for one little cartoon. And that one little cartoon made me notorious, if you like. And ever since then, I have had to, when I work for people, because I illustrate books, I illustrate people's books, you know, and when I work with anybody, a new person, I have to explain this to them. And I have to say, go and Google me. And if you find that what you see you don't like, then don't work, you'd better not work with me. Because people are then afraid of being associated with me, you know? So I've had more cancellations during last year because of this, from people that didn't want to be associated with me. There's a book that comes out every year called Britain's Best Political Cartoons, and the guy who edits it, I've known him over the years. He wanted to include the cartoon in it, and the lawyers at Random House said no, he couldn't. So that was the second cancellation. LGB Alliance, who are quite new, you know, a couple of years old, and they're great little organisation. And they told me they couldn't do a review of my book because I was too controversial and it might affect their application for charity status. So that was the third cancellation.
Wow.
And I've also been told that although they can't stop me, there's a women's conference in Britain. I'm not even going to name it. I'm not supposed to be talking about this really, but I've been told, and I'm not even going to name it, but I've been told that they can't have me as a speaker or give me a stall because that would mean putting me in the brochure, and that would be too controversial for the venue that they're holding the conference at. So this has basically tarnished everything I do, even in the women's movement.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it hasn't affected in my own life. I have a lovely group of friends who they didn't bat an eyelid at any of this. They just thought, they know that I'm radical. They know that I'm on the left and all that, you know. But it caused me a lot of problems at the time it happened. My union immediately threatened me with dismissal, even though it was nothing to do with my work, nothing to do with my union activities. But because it was a public thing, they immediately sent me a letter. They were going to discipline me, you know, with view to chucking me out of the union. And this was because of trans activists embedded in the union.
And when you say trans activists, who are you talking about? Are you talking about men? Yeah. Are you talking about women? Are you talking who?
Mainly, yeah. The LGBT champion in my own union is a man, and every union have got these, you know, so-called LGBT champions, and they're all completely captured by it, you know, in the same way that the police are and lots of other institutions are captured by it.
When you were making, can you describe the night or the few days where you were making this particular cartoon, and what kind of was running through you, and why were you called to illustrate what, you know, what's going on with women's?
It's an excellent question, Isabella. when I was drawing this particular cartoon, and even when I look at it now, and I know when other people look at it, there's a lot of emotion in the cartoon. And I think even now people feel that emotion. I actually put into it the kind of fear I would have felt when I was young myself, if I had gone into a space like a changing room and there were men in there, you know. And I was thinking back to when I was younger and how I would have been frightened, you know. And so there is fear. The fear was in that cartoon, and of course, the reason it was called transphobic was because people assumed that it's equating trans, and I'm using inverted commas, trans people as predators. And as we all know, that is not what we mean by TERF. That's not what we mean by TERF. We just mean that we do not want them in our spaces that women have fought for so long, over 100 years, you know.
Mm-hmm. And when you say trans people, you mean we're talking here specifically about men who believe that they're women. So men identifying as women in women's safe spaces.
They are the danger. That is where the danger lies, because clearly we understand that there are, unfortunately, girls that feel this way, and we'll talk more about that later on. There doesn't seem to be the same argument on the other side, that people are offended by them going into male toilets. That just doesn't seem, that is not part of the conversation at all. Presumably because they still use women's loo and women's changing spaces, and nobody minds because we recognize them as women. Do you understand what I mean?
Right. And women in men's bathrooms are not a threat to men.
They're not, they're not, and they're not a threat to us, are they? The girls that, so clearly the whole argument is about men invading women's spaces, and that was the emotion that I put into the cartoon. So yes, it meant a lot to me. Once I've drawn a cartoon, I more or less forget about it, because I then go on to the thing I'm doing for the following week. It's the same way I'm operating for the outlet I work for at the moment, which is called uncancelled.co.uk. It's easy to remember. People want to look it up. There's a lot of my cartoons on there, my most recent cartoons. So, but since then, because I've become part of the Rad Femme world, and I've had so much support and encouragement, I've done more cartoons on this issue, because I've been drawing for campaigners and I've been supporting campaigns. I've contributed designs for merchandise, for example. There's one in particular called Keep Prisons Single Sex, which I think is starting up an American branch. And so they've got my cartoons on their merchandise to try and raise money for their cause. And that's what I said I was going to do. I said they didn't cancel a cartoonist, they created a campaigner, you know?
Absolutely.
And that's what's happened.
Wow, it's phenomenal. It's so wonderful to hear that. Well, first of all, your friends supported you and stood by you, and that actually getting canceled has opened up this whole world and fueled your activism.
It has. I mean, because for most of my life, I'm over 60 now. Look, for most of my life, I've had to work for a living, 5 or 6 days a week. You know, when I was self-employed years ago, I was working 7 days a week. I hardly had time to do any drawing, you know. And when I did, it was only in a very small scale way. And I was just doing things for people who are maybe publishing a little book on the internet, self-publishing, that sort of thing. So I kind of kept up with it, but I didn't do it in a systematic way. And it was only when I became the cartoonist of the Morning Star in 2015 that I really started doing it regularly and getting back into it, if you like. And now I feel that I'm part of this scene now. You know, I have campaigners calling me from all over the place, different parts of the world, you know, asking me to do things for them. Most of it, to be honest, I give a lot away. I just do it for free. You know, I mean, if they insist on paying me, then I'm really, don't charge them very much at all. So I'm trying my best to support campaigners with my art. And I think we're doing quite well, especially in Britain. You know, we're having a lot of success.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of momentum for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. So last time we spoke, you had talked about your own dysphoria and how that resonate with what's going on right now with adolescent girls wanting to chop
Mm.
off their breasts and remove their uterus. You had said that you can relate to that experience. Would you talk a little more about what you meant by that?
Yeah, I appreciate what you said earlier, that you thought very carefully about asking me to speak about this again, because not so much as gender dysphoria, quite a lot of women are writing about that now. We see quite a lot of accounts, and detransitioning as well. There's a lot of girls when they hit their mid-20s, which is when you become mature. Your body and your brain becomes mature. That seems to be round about when they're detransitioning. Um, who knows how long it's going to take the boys? Boys mature later, so maybe they're not going to be doing the detransitioning until they're mid-30s or something. I don't know, but clearly there's a lot more going on. They've been doing a lot in Sweden, around helping detransitioners in a clinic there. So that's very good news. But when I was growing up, I was growing up in the 70s. Nobody had ever heard of this subject. Do you know what I mean? Nobody had ever heard of it. I mean, there were obviously drag is well known. Drag was part of the British pantomime season every year. You'd get taken to the pantomime, see men dressed, the Ugly Sisters of Cinderella, and that was kind of part of our growing up. And there were drag acts on TV, which. But everybody knew they were men. There was no suggestion that these were anything other than show business, and people loved them, absolutely loved them. So and there was a lot of what today would be homophobic humor on television, comedians, which is all look. We nowadays we look at it and we think, oh well, that wouldn't be allowed today, but it was all just part of the background of growing up in the 70s. So being a non-conforming girl in those days, there was nothing really to describe it. There was no way of describing it to anybody. I never ever had a conversation with my parents about it. I mean, never. I mean, what they saw was it was a child that was always in trouble, that was always not turning up at school. Um, I mean, when I was primary school age, I used to run away from home and sleep rough for a couple of nights. But there was never any kind of talking to you about it. There was no counselling. There was no. It was just that you were a troubled teenager. You tried to be non-conforming. You pick clothes that your parents hate. I mean, most teenagers do this, Isabella. I think you'd probably agree with me that this is part of normal puberty, where you're growing away from your parents. You're trying to shock them. You're trying to show them that you're different, that you don't believe in their values, and that is all part of growing up, so that you will go out on your own and live on your own. I mean, it's a normal part. This is how we've evolved, isn't it? We're not actually meant to live with our parents till we're in our 40s, 50s, are we? We're meant to move away from them. And so it's normal, And I think everybody goes through quite a lot of discomfort and trouble when they're a teenager. Girls much more than boys, because we have all the sexual bullying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this business of not feeling that you're a girl, or when puberty starts, not wanting to, trying to hide it and not wanting to have anything to do with it. I think, from what I gather and from what I've read and in my own circle of acquaintances, I think most girls go through this. Perhaps some are in families that are very supportive and help them through it. I certainly wasn't. I wasn't given any information about periods or anything like that. All came as a big shock.
Was it just wanting to
Well,
wear gender non-conforming clothing? I mean, what was the line? And then
yeah, well, nowadays I'd probably be called a goth, because I chose all black clothes and things with buckles and straps all over. Do you know what I mean? I think I would be called a goth today. And that really, really upset my father. Was quite abusive anyway, and that really upset him, and that was all part of it, I suppose. I was deliberately trying to provoke him because I couldn't stand him, you know. But when you're young, you're powerless. You know, I mean, I lived out in the countryside. I had no money of my own, had no transport of my own. Now, if you live in a city, it might be a bit easier. You know, you might have more friends. You might, let's say, you wanted a tattoo or something. Well, you can walk. You can go to the nearest tattoo shop, but you can't do that when you live out in the sticks. You know, in terms of trying to stop puberty, as it were. I mean, I persuaded my mother to let the doctor prescribe me the pill at the age of 15, although I wasn't having sex, but that was to stop the periods. So I just pressurized my mum to you know, and and the doctor was quite happy to do it, you know, on the grounds of having uncomfortable periods. So you just then take the pill all the time without a break. It stops your periods, you know. So that's suppressing your estrogen for a start, which I suppose if you do it for years and years, probably gives you a natural bit of testosterone that you've got more chance, you know, to. So nobody ever, I don't know if anybody's ever done any studies on girls that just take the ordinary contraceptive pill to suppress periods. I don't know.
There is actually a decent amount of research on the harms of pharmaceutical birth control, and I like that you brought that up. That like the tools that were available to you at that time
Yes.
were the pill. Like, how do
Yeah.
I escape this experience that I know so little about, that I fear because I know so little about, and will further magnify me as a woman, right? The transition from girl to woman, you know, the way
Yeah.
that we
Yeah.
become sexualized. I mean, it's that, like, I don't find that there's anything, I don't believe there's something inherently painful or uncomfortable about puberty. I believe that it's I mean, aside from like like new physical sensations that are happening, you know, within us, but more so what it signifies in a woman hating world, in a woman hating society, what it
Yeah.
signifies to grow breasts, and
Yeah.
for our hips and our butts to, you know, our thighs to get wider and rounder. And
I was unlucky that I did not have parents who were supportive or knew anything about anything. You know, other girls might have had, you know, I had quite a dysfunctional family, and I do wonder how much gender dysphoria is a product of broken homes, dysfunctional families, you know, an upbringing where you don't get the support or the knowledge. I mean, I'm not saying by that my mother was a lovely woman, you know, and she wasn't stupid at all. She was very, very bright. But it was just no experience. There was nothing in her life to give her the experience to know what was going on with me, you know. So I hardly spent any time at school at all, and really leading up to when I take exams, and I just did my studying at home and got through the exams. Don't know how, and then I went to what we call the School of Hard Knocks. You know, I didn't have further education. I ended up, you know, I ended up in psychiatric hospital at the age of 16 and a half. And this is all because of inability to cope, really, with puberty and with being a teenager, and just trying to escape from it all the time.
was that the end of the kind of pharmaceutical endeavor? Did you have any other interaction with the medical system as an adolescent to change yourself, to change your body beyond taking the pill?
Well, when I was in the psychiatric hospital, I was in there for 6 months, and they said I had a personality disorder, and it was the happiest 6 months of my life up to that point. I was absolutely happy every single day. It was great, you know. I had loads of friends in there. It was a very look how young I was, you know. It was absolutely wonderful, you know, wonderful. I still look back on it as the happiest 6 months of my when I was a young woman, you know. I can't explain how that helped me, but the trouble is when they released me from there, they just sent me straight back. There was nothing. There was no attempt to try and socialize me or try and help me to maybe move on my own or anything like that. It was just back to where you came from, and that didn't help. So things went from bad to worse. And as I said, and I'm not going to go into details, but I had a very difficult time of it in my early 20s, you know. So I drank very heavily, mixed in all with the wrong people, that kind of thing.
You know, if someone had said to you, you know, if you had known that there was this thing called trans, like, do you think you would have been like a candidate for body
Yeah,
modification? I
100%,
mean,
100%. Yeah, I would have wanted the breasts off, everything. Yeah, 100%. Because when I was before I actually had my first period, I lived in a fantasy world where I thought I was going to grow up to be a man. You know, I really did believe it. Now, whether it was from reading American comics or watching films, or I have no idea, because I hadn't read anything about it. I just automatically thought that was what was going to happen, you know, and that's why obviously puberty was a big shock. I really
wow.
believed it. I really thought that was going to happen.
You thought you were going to grow up to be a man.
Yeah, a lot of it is to do with the way my father socialized me. He brought me and my brother up as if we were both boys. When we were quite small, he'd take us to the same barber shop for short back and sides, that kind of thing. I was always dressed as a boy, which that happens. I mean, honestly, that's not unusual. Lots of young girls do dress as boys all the way through until they get to secondary school. So that wasn't unusual. But you know, I was the one he would take to football matches. Do you know what I mean? It was almost as if I was a son, because he wasn't particularly happy with my actual brother. He thought he was a sissy, and
Oh,
my
wow.
brother wasn't interested in the football and all that, and I was the one who was. Do you know what I mean? So it was almost like I was the substitute boy, you know.
Oh, wow.
So I think some of that is where it all comes from.
The last time we spoke, we recorded, which, you know, no one has seen.
Yeah,
But
body modification.
yes, the body
Yeah.
modification. Do
Well,
you want to speak
I
to
wish
that?
I had done it the normal way. I wish I'd gone in for the nose piercing and the tattoos that some other young girls do, because what I wanted to do was have my face modified so that I didn't look like my father's side of the family. Because I was so desperate to get away from his house and him. And I I had I had an overbite, and that made me look like all the women on his side of the family, you see. And so my mum would take me backwards and forwards to the dentist, and I had braces and all that. That was very fashionable, kids to have braces, which is actually a form of child abuse, because it's not allowing their mouths to grow properly and the teeth to all grow normally. You know, it's actually a form of child abuse, which, looking back on it now, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I really resent that was done to me. Anyway, so wearing braces for a long time, and all my little girlfriends at school were wearing braces, but it was a big fashionable thing. And so I said, well, you know, I want this cured, you know, and that would involve breaking both jaws and resetting them. Quite a big operation. And the dentist said, well, we can't possibly do that at this age. You will have to wait till you're about 21, 22, because your bones are still growing, you know. So I wasn't allowed to have it done when I was a teenager. And I was so determined to have it done. And I did end up having it done when I was about 28, 29. I actually did go and I did have it done. And it is now considered a cosmetic operation, which you're not allowed to have. I was one of the last people to get it free on the National Health Service. And the reason I got it free was because I had such a long history of my mother taking me and wearing braces. I'm not going to say that my mother had Munchausen's or anything like that, but she certainly took me backwards and forwards to doctors all the time, and I was supposed to be delicate and always supposed to have things wrong with me. And
Wow.
do you know what I mean? It was that sort of thing. It was overprotective. So all those things combined, it was all very dysfunctional. yeah, so I've actually I did actually have that done, and it was a big operation which took months to recover from.
Wow.
And it does have parallels, I think, with what these young girls today are doing. They're trying to modify their bodies to such an extent that their parents wouldn't recognize them, right? Their own family, friends, people they grew up with wouldn't even recognize them, wouldn't even recognize their voice, because even their voices change.
Oh my gosh, that is just I
And
just need
that's
to,
how and
oh,
that's how I felt. That's how I felt. If somebody had said to me, would you have this done to make yourself look so different? And oh God, yeah, I would have done it in a moment. I would have done it in a moment. And I was growing up long before the internet, before social media, before any of these things that were around to tell you that that's how you should be feeling. So to me, it wasn't. Yeah, I grew up thinking I should have been a boy, or I wanted to be a boy, but I was sensible enough to know that I wasn't by the time do you see what I mean? Once puberty came
right.
along, I was able to, I was sensible, but I absolutely hated it being a girl, hated being a woman, wanted to escape from it. I mean, I went into a male profession. I was in the construction industry for 20 years. I felt more comfortable in a male environment. I just wanted to get away from anything feminine. So yeah, my gender dysphoria affected my whole life because it affected my choices of jobs I went into and people I socialized with, places I went, things I did. It affects everything. I doubt if you ever really grow out of it.
Wow. Personally, I have a huge problem with just the term gender dysphoria. I think it's like a fancy way of deflecting like societal issues on and like putting them on
But
women.
that's true, but that's an intellectual way of looking at it. When you're thinking like this as a young person, you're not intellectualizing it that way, and you don't know that that's how society operates.
Right.
How,
You're
how
just
you're how
internalizing everything.
how you're feeling is
Yeah.
how you're actually feeling about your own body and your own future, and what kind of future are you going to have, which I couldn't see any future. I mean, I thought about suicide every day of my life as a young woman, every day of my life. I had no idea what I was going to do. I had no idea how I could live on my own independently. I had no skills. I had no idea about anything. Um, I didn't go to further education, so had a lot of catching up to do when I got older.
So what was the switch? How does one woman who's as you described, gender dysphoric, who grows up in an abusive home, who seeks out quite extreme body modification, I mean, how do you think you got through it?
I don't know whether I've ever got through it. I mean, it did affect me all the time. I mean, even though because I happen to be heterosexual. I mean, even the relationships I went into, they were all abusive to one extent or another. And one involved actual domestic violence, which I had to take a man to court and get him convicted. And the only reason I can talk about that now is because I found out last year that he died.
Wow.
I spent 15 years looking over my shoulder, and I would have been afraid to talk about it in case it got somehow got back to him. And because men like that don't operate alone, they have a little gang of mates that they can call on who might track you down and that kind of thing. So yeah, so I I think you go into abusive relationships because you don't think you deserve anything better. I was 50 years old before I finally met somebody who was decent, and that is my husband now. So we've been married 11 years. So, but that took me most of my life, most of my adult life. Another thing that the gender dysphoria and everything did was it made me determined not to have children. I
Mm,
mean, I'd made that decision by the time I was 10 years old.
wow.
I I was determined not to. Used to have nightmares about things like, like the sex education at school, where they showed us the film of a baby being born. Had nightmares about it. And that all came from not having a family which supported me or helped me through puberty properly.
the idea of creating a family, and your idea of family is the only family you've ever known, that makes sense why that would feel totally horrifying and there would be an
Yeah.
aversion.
Yes, my attitude, how I explained it to myself around about as I ages of 12, 13, 14, that age, was that I didn't want to bring a child into the world, into a family like I had. You know,
Right.
I didn't want to put another child through it. That was how I put it to myself. And so the only men I looked for were men who also didn't want children. But that means you end up with the dregs, because the decent men have been snapped up by women who want perfectly normal relationships and to have families. Do you see what I mean? So you end up with the rubbish. I mean, I'm laughing about it now, but it's not funny.
No,
Abusive
it's,
relationships are not funny.
I mean, I speak to women regularly who are either currently in abusive relationships or have formerly been in abusive relationships with men. What baffles me is the rhetoric that so many have internalized, that these trans identified men are somehow the most oppressed population. It's laughable. It really is laughable. I think what's really potent in talking about and exposing the harms of trans ideology is needing to elevate women's stories, right? And that's what radical feminists are doing, elevating the stories of women, like letting women speak, first of all. But right, there's a reason why, women are being silenced, because each woman has her own variation of the
Yeah,
same story, which is
yeah.
that we are oppressed on the basis of our sex.
I don't know whether you've come across this as well. I think you might have done as well. I feel that some of what's going on in the women's movement, the rad fem movement, with women being some women being attacked by other women for spurious reasons, really, is elitism. I mean, you've just said yes. There's an awful lot out there. There's a lot, but a lot of it is very academic. A lot of it is not speaking to the women, lower class women. It seems to be a complete cut off between academia on this side and sex workers on the other side. And those of us that didn't have higher education, haven't got degrees and all that, we're almost invisible. Do you understand what I mean?
Hmm.
And so somebody like Posey Parker, who I have massive respect for, I'm going to see her again on Sunday. We're having a speaker's corner again at Hyde Park on Sunday, which I'm going to. My first big expedition since the lockdowns.
Amazing.
Massive, massive respect for her, and she's got a degree, but she's not from a posh background or anything like that. And look at the way she's been attacked by some of the academics because they don't like her style of campaigning. It seems to be what it boils down to. And to me, that's just I can't believe that. That's unbelievable.
I mean, I think she's a genius. I mean, I love what she's done. I love the way
Yeah.
she speaks. I like that she says what she means and means what she says. I think we
She is
absolutely
putting
need more
herself
of that.
in harm's way for the rest of us. I mean, there's not many women that would be willing to stand up, get arrested, and all this, and still carry on speaking out and motivating hundreds and hundreds of other women to do the same thing. She is actual heroine of our times. She really is. I'm not. I mean, I'm not saying that lightly. She really is a heroine, and and she's encouraged me. I mean, she motivates me. I'm happy to stand up and use my real name and say where I come from and speak out, in public and as much as I possibly can for this cause. I wonder whether you agree that a lot of this, what we're calling gender dysphoria, might be better called body dysphoria, and may just simply be a reaction to the way that you experience puberty. some people might sail through it with no problems at all, but others, people like me, we've been unfortunate circumstances. We were in the family home we were in, and maybe a lot of it is down to this, because certainly a lot of the girls you read about, especially the detransitioners, or you read their stories, they have some very, very odd family upbringing and very odd sort of backgrounds, and maybe this is a lot to do with it. And what I think we're missing today, Isabella, is schools used to have, way back in the day, they used to have a school nurse or a school matron, who was there to talk to girls when they're having their periods, or if they're unhappy. Or schools don't have anything like that now. Certainly not in Britain, they don't.
Right. They have the gender affirming counselors.
Oh gosh, yeah, but not an actual, you know what I mean? But nobody who's giving actual proper counselling to girls.
Yeah.
Certainly schools don't, not the ones I know about, don't have anything,
Yeah, I don't think it's just a discomfort with body sensations and changes. I think it's a destruction of matrilineal knowledge. I think it's a result of sexism. I think it's a result of domestic violence situations. I mean, unaccounted for, just male violence against women. I mean, I think like the more we obscure it, the farther away we are from identifying a solution. And so the pathology around gender dysphoria, body discomfort, that's just the symptom, right? That's just that comes after the trauma. So, I mean, it might sound simplistic to say like a trauma response, but yeah, I would certainly say
exactly how I feel like it. That's exactly what I feel.
Yeah.
I feel that I went through years and years of basically post-traumatic stress disorder from my upbringing, my upbringing, and all these other things I experienced and the things I felt were responses to that. And I've never had any kind of therapy that has ever done me any good. So, and you feel, does everybody just have to battle through this on their own? No, this is why I think older women, it's important we speak out and we say, look, we experience this as well. Yes, you might have some bad experiences, but you can use them. You can use them to make yourself stronger. It's a bit old-fashioned to say, but what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, And I think it's very important that women my age, we do speak out and we say, look, nobody expects to get everything they want. You have to work hard to get what you want in your adult life. It's not all handed to you on a plate. You don't just, oh yeah, I'm going to go to university, I'm going to get this wonderful job. That only happens to a minority of people, We've actually infantilized the whole of society. We have made people like infants all the way into their sort of 30s and 40s. They don't grow up. They think everything, they're going to get everything just like that. And that isn't what life is like. And I hope, I hope that, I've spoke to you tonight. I have not spoken about, I haven't spoken about body modification before to anybody. It's a bit, I hope people don't think I'm using you as a sort of counselling service. Because I'm not. I think it's important to talk about these things.
No, I think, what is pathologized as counseling or, stories that can only be shared in this context. I mean, who does that serve? I mean, obviously, like privacy is should be respected, right? And women sitting in circle speaking frankly about their experiences needs to happen for us to heal as a sex class. I mean, how does it make any sense at all for us each to go in isolation to a therapist and discuss our story in private? I mean, doesn't that just further isolate us? And it's interesting that you said that like the best 6 months of your life, I'm assuming you were with only women in that facility. Am I wrong?
There was a women's dormitory, which was obviously just women. But once you got onto the main ward, it was mixed during the day. it was just, I mean, I was a child basically. I mean, it was just a very happy time. It was because I did not have any restrictions. Also, in a psychiatric hospital, the patient is the one who says what happens. So I was able to say I don't want my parents to visit me.
Mm,
Do you see what I mean? So
yeah.
they allowed me to have space to heal, as it were. That it was an
Right.
very old-fashioned hospital, and they closed them all down. I think one of the worst things they did was close the old hospitals down, actually, because I had a good experience. I say I had a good experience of it. I still went on to have a very difficult time for several years, but it helped me to figure out who I was, definitely. you know and look, I mean, I'm making the best of it. I'm making the best of what I can do now. I'm trying to help other campaigners and trying to get the message across. Hope you'll mention my book, people. It's my
I
book, which
absolutely will. And I will
um
link it. I will link
yeah,
it in the show notes.
lovely job, thank you.
2020, the year we were canceled.
Yeah, we were all cancelled, and there's lots of cartoons in there about J.K. Rowling and gender criticism, and I think people will enjoy it.
I will definitely share it in the show notes. Thank you so much, Stella.
Oh, it's been nice talking to you again, Isabella. Thank you very much.
Thank you.